can't tell you how excited I am to be here. This program has been a dream for many of us for many years. Personally, when I moved from the Bay Area 25 years ago, I wanted a health education program, and now we have one, and that feels fabulous in this town. I'm really happy to present Diane as a speaker tonight. Diane's been a licensed acupuncturist for, I think, since 1985, and been in Willits for 10 years. And her passion is making our very complicated body simple for people to understand it, and to really make some positive changes once they understand it. So I'm happy to present Diane Smalley.
Thank you, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces. So I brought these tools from Happy spring, everyone. And have you noticed going down Commercial, those big, beautiful white trees all around town? It helps us to look up, and we're looking out. And springtime is a time that we say that the liver is most active. And I'm going to be sprinkling little energy medicine type of things throughout. And so if you have questions about those, feel free to come up afterwards. But springtime is the time when the liver is waking up. And a couple years ago I realized that that's one of the function, or that's one of the ways we use the flowers, is we see them, and through our eyes, that the eyes are related to the liver, and so that wakes up our liver. And we're going to be talking a lot about the liver tonight. So I'd like to do a little experiment with you all tonight. And I believe that when you kind of wiggle your fingers or wiggle your hands like that, yeah, we'll call that the twinkle. It sort of connects the two sides of the brain. So everything that I'm saying tonight you will remember. You don't even have to. And on top of that, pretty much everything I'm going to say is in the handout, and so you can look at that later. Another strategy I have is nodding. That kind of it's kind of like rocking the brain. It gets all the juices going in the brain, and so that will get the information in there deeper. This is very important information that I'm going to be sharing with you tonight, and I'm so happy and grateful to be here. So anytime you feel like it, you can let your head nod, and then if you kind of do it with a beat, you'll be dancing. And pretty soon, we'll be having a good time. And if at any time during the night you have a eureka moment, let it go. Share it with us. You don't have to be quiet or still. So I have three main goals for us this evening. And I'm gonna say what they are right now, and then we'll go through those, obviously. So the first one, and the one that's dearest to my heart, is to admire bile. How many of you admire bile? It's a stretch, I know, stretch. How many of you admire bile right now? Okay. Some people that I've talked to before. So that's one of our goals, and we want to appreciate fats the fats in our diet. Okay, seeing some nods there, that's good. Already good there. And we're going to make a connection with all of the digestive tract and the whole concept of inflammation. Are people familiar with inflammation?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah, pain. When there's pain happening, that means there's inflammation. Have you ever noticed how there's a million diets and books and experts telling you what to eat and how to eat it? Michael Pollan, Dr. Oz, Adele Davis, Robert Atkins, Julia Child. And so, I have one of those ideas too. And it's something that I've been using now since I first started my practice many years ago, when I was 13. And it has to do with the digestive tract, and we're going to go through that. And one thing I'd like to make real clear, I hear a lot of people talking about eating an alkaline diet. This is the pH scale, but before I go into that, I'm going to say a little bit more about that idea of the alkaline diet. To me, that's a little bit abstract. the only way to know what my saliva, the pH of my saliva is really, is to test it with strips. That means I have to carry something around with me. Well, guess what we always have with us? Our body. So if we use our body as a reference and our heart as a reference for everything we do, then we're going to be able to feel, drop down, or feel what's going on and make better choices. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. See a twinkle there? We're going to be talking about the digestive tract, and you have to admit it's kind of a delicate subject. It's sort of an intimate thing, our digestive tract. And it's really typical to even have that kind of ew reaction. And how many of you have that? Okay. Well, actually, that's a completely normal thing to feel, because it's in our interest to have an aversion to seeing our intestines. It's completely natural. And that's why we have that kind of reaction to the digestive tract. Now, eating is a completely automatic thing. In fact, once we come out of the womb and we're born, we breathe first, ideally, but then what's the very first thing we do? We go to our mother's breast. And so right from the beginning, eating is central to our lives. Have you ever noticed how you get hungry and you have to eat 3 meals a day or more sometimes? Mm-hmm. So let's see, feeling hungry, right foot, left foot. Mm-hmm. I don't have to say, where's that refrigerator again? It's completely automatic. And when things are that automatic and habitual, if we want to make changes, it's something that we need to do very slowly and gradually. And we want to be gentle with ourselves around it. And make our eating time more conscious. Bring it into our conscious awareness. And eating is so automatic, it's kind of like driving. Did you ever notice when you were first learning to drive, you had to, build your car like this when you're trying, if you had a shift and all that, so there was a lot of jerking going on. But after a while, you can be drinking your water and looking in the rearview mirror and combing your hair, while you're driving. It's completely natural. When you come up to a green light, what do? You go. And so what we're going to find out tonight is what we need when we sit down to eat is bile flow. Right. So what do we do when we see a green light? Go. What do we need when we sit down to eat? Bile flow. pH is written, it's not even on here, little p, big H. And what I believe it stands for, you can find different definitions, but it stands for the potential of hydrogen to be taken up or given off. Does anyone know hydrogen is the most prolific element in the, yeah, okay, good. You're pretty smart. and so it's a scale for the potential of hydrogen to move around, to connect. And the scale goes from 0 to 14, with 7 being right in the middle. And the classic neutral substance, neither acid or alkaline, is water. And it's not always a 7, but generally nature is. And it just so happens that our blood wants to be between 7.35 and 7.45. It's a very tiny range. And all the organs in our body have something to do with keeping that pH even. We don't even have to think about it. It just happens automatically. It's just fascinating. Now, we are going to be talking about 2 different parts of the digestive tract. And the first one is has an acid. Door number 1 is going to be under acid control, and door number 2 is going to be under alkaline control. Another way to think of it is that acid is hungry, and so it's empty, and so it wants to take on those hydrogen ions, so it eats electrons. And the further we go to alkalinity, it has extra hydrogen ions, so it wants to donate electrons. Have you ever heard how an alkaline burn is considered to be more serious than an acid burn? Because it's putting stuff in instead of just taking away. Collages are all the rage right now, so I made a collage. And so I've got it kind of covered up here because the first most important part, okay, this is a model of a restaurant. We're going to talk about the flow of food through the restaurant. And then we're going to, use that as an illustration for how food flows through our food tube. And the most important part of the restaurant are the managers. Here they are sitting around the table deciding what to cook and how to promote the restaurant and so forth. And their information comes out through the door. And this just happens to be door number 1. We'll come back to that. And so starting here, and I've got this colored green for a reason. You can see it's the same as what's on the pH chart. And here we have the farm, the nice green farm. People making choices, choosing foods to eat and to grow. And it excites the senses. And then the food is trucked in through the road into the kitchen, where the chef is at work making soup. Probably for a few of you probably heard that. And we have lots of different kinds of chefs. And in this restaurant, this is a soup restaurant. And if you notice, if you could see it, these bowls of soup have little garnishes on them. And so just before the soup goes out the door into the dining room, it gets a little garnish put on it, going through the door. And now we're in the dining room where people are having fun, sitting there eating their soup and loving their food. And I love this guy. and absorbing the nutrients. They're taking the food in. And then lastly, out the back door number 2 is here, we have the bathroom, or we could say the compost pile. So the food scraps are going out from the kitchen into the compost pile, and the cycle is complete. Okay, that's our restaurant. On the very front of your handout, you have a picture of the food tube. This is an old chart. I made this 20 years ago or something like that. I've updated a little bit. So let's now focus in on what we're carrying around with us, our food tube. And we're going to kind of use some of those restaurant ideas to illustrate what's going on in the food tube. So we start out with the mouth. I like to call that the farmer, because in the mouth we're preparing the food, chewing it up, and getting it ready to go to market, going into the restaurant. And what we're going to notice is there are different secretions at all the different stages of the digestive tract. And the secretion of the mouth is saliva. And we're also going to look at the pH of these different secretions, just because the pH tells us something about what it does. This is how I first learned it from my teacher. If you get in a hot tub, you're all relaxed and warm and everything, and sort of floating. Well, if we took your pH, we'll just say it that way, we took your pH, we'd see that you were more on the acid side. Heat causes the body to go a little bit more towards acid. And acid has the effect of relaxing us. When we're a little more acid, we're relaxed. On the other hand, what happens when you go out on a cold day? You start shaking. Well, we could say that cold brings the body a little more towards alkalinity, this way, and it causes the tissues to contract. So this is really important. Acid, flaccid, alkaline, contract. That's on your chart. The saliva is slightly alkaline, so there's a little bit of contraction, but not that much. In fact, in a little bit, we're going to have a treat, and I encourage you to, when you drink the carrot, apple, celery, parsley, cucumber juice, just kind of let it sit in your mouth and notice how it feels and what happens with the saliva when that comes in. So the key here is that when we see an alkaline environment, that's the proper environment for the enzymes to work. And there are enzymes in the saliva that start the starch digestion mainly. And I heard enzymes described as molecular scissors today. So then we chew our food up, and we swallow our food, goes through the esophagus, and now the food is in the kitchen. We call that the stomach. And the stomach is where the food is, I call it the macro digestion. Food is being broken down into a soup, into a liquid. It just so happens that the lining of the stomach makes a very, very strong acid, and here it is. stomach acid, 1.1. That is really, really strong acid. We love that acid because it helps us to digest our proteins and also calcium and iron. Without that hydrochloric acid, we would have a hard time digesting that. Now, I also mentioned a little bit on the flyer for the talk about why our stomach hurts when we're under stress. Well, the stomach needs a good supply of blood to make that hydrochloric acid. If a tiger came in through the door right now, I would go into an alarm mode. And when I'm in alarm mode, the blood is being shunted out to the arms and legs so I can run or fight, depending on if I'm angry, I'll tend to fight. If I'm afraid, I'll tend to run. We don't always get to do that, but that's how we're wired. Temporarily, the blood, some of the blood, not all of it, but some of the blood is going to be shunted away from the digestive tract. And so when I'm in that alarm mode, that is not a time to be eating or digesting. That whole process kind of stops for a while. And then it comes back when we get a chance to rest. And so that tends to cause the stomach to not work that well when we're in that alarm mode. So now you think, well, how come the stomach doesn't just digest? Well, the chef is really clever, and the chef makes a nice mucus coating to protect the stomach lining. It's just an amazing setup, and how about that? Isn't that just how can that possibly be? Okay, so now we've got a nice acid contents in the stomach. The stomach contents are leaving and going into the small intestine. And in most cases, there's flow from the bile and flow from the pancreas coming together into one tube, and then it enters into that small intestine. Here's the small intestine, and commonly that's what it looks like. Not everyone. Some people have two openings. There's all kinds of differences, but that's a typical way that those two come together. So now we've got this acid coming through here and coming through the door between the kitchen and the dining room. And what does acid do to tissues? Relaxes them, so that door opens up. And we have flow from the pancreas and the gallbladder. We call that the garnish and the dressing. So the food is leaving the stomach and going into the small intestine. It's getting a little squirted. Guess what the pH of the flow from the liver and gallbladder and the pancreas? Very alkaline. And so the first thing that's going to happen, the main thing that's going to happen is it's going to neutralize the acid coming from the stomach. Really important. We don't want the acid to continue through the small intestine. So it neutralizes the stomach acid. Now it sets up the proper environment for the enzymes to do the microdigestion, breaking our food down into tiny little particles. Now we're in the small intestine, and it doesn't look anything like what I've drawn here. In fact, I brought my amazing model here, and I'll tell you, I spent a lot of time trying to make a body. And it doesn't look anything like the real thing, because nature does a much better job. But the reason I did this is because what we think of the small intestine, it's not just this big long tube. It's a long tube, but it's encased in this membrane. It's got this incredible membrane. I don't know if you can see that. And I actually read just recently that it's actually, in life, it's more like 10 feet long. But it tends to relax when we die, and when people dissect it, it looks much longer. That's kind of interesting. But anyway, and see what we've got here? We've got this is how the blood gets to the small intestine. You know, the blood vessels don't just go along. They go and they all collect. They all come down together and collect all the way down to the end here. And then we have the large intestine starting here. And they all come together. This is the most important thing, is that from the small intestine, all the blood coming from the small intestine, and that's this blue stuff here, it's all coming together and attaching to the liver right there. So here, and on the back side of your front page, you have a picture that looks somewhat like this. This is a little more detailed. And so we've broken our food down into such tiny little particles that it can actually pass through these cells. The small intestine, you know, it looks like a tube at first, but it's extremely folded and muscular. And the folds have folds. And so when we look down at the tiny detail, we see that there are what they call villi. Also, there's one villus and 3 villi. That microdigestion, that breaking down by the enzymes happens, and the food is so small that it can actually pass in through the cells, not in between. Here's a blow up of the actual edge, and you see the folds have folds. The small intestine is smart, and it knows what can come in and what can't. And so it allows the particles to come through, and then eventually they get absorbed into the bloodstream. And this diagram here is showing a lymph vessel. And there are lymph vessels and blood vessels in each one of these little villi. The lymph vessel is mainly where the fat tends to be absorbed, and then the blood vessels are where all the nutrients go, and all of this goes to the liver first. It doesn't travel through the body. No peanut butter in the legs. Just goes straight to the liver. And so the liver has the job of deciding what to do with all of that. It does about 500 different jobs. And so now we've got door number 2 here at the end of the small intestine. And we call that the ileocecal valve. It's the valve between the end of the small intestine and the beginning of the large intestine, which is coming around here. And now, coming through here, it's different from up at the beginning. We have a very alkaline environment, because the stomach continues to produce a little bit of alkaline substance, and it becomes more alkaline as it goes along. And now we've got a nice alkaline environment here, and that's going to hold that door closed. When there's nothing needing to move through, we want that door to be closed. You imagine why?
Don't let it come close.
You don't want that. Shit happens. Exactly. The large intestine is where all those good bacteria, what are now called probiotics, the good bacteria, all the trillions and trillions of bacteria, they live in the large intestine, and their job is to break down what's left into a form that can be eliminated smoothly. And so we don't want that waste coming back into the small intestine. So we want that door to be kind of closed when it's at rest. But when it's time to move through, we want things to be able to move on through. It just so happens that the large intestine, all of that good bacteria that's living in there, the main product is some lactic acid. So there's a slight acidity to the large intestine, and that allows that door to open when it's time. So just to review, we started out with the farmer, and that was slightly alkaline. Then we went to the stomach, very strong acid, and we went to the small intestine where we're absorbing, very alkaline, and now at the end we get a slight acidity. It's in perfect balance. It's just so wonderful. Any questions?
If you don't have a gallbladder, where do you get the bile?
Good question.
Good
Good question. And that's actually really important. So now, you're right with me. So what's not drawn on this chart, but what is illustrated really well in this beautiful small intestine that we have here. I'm looking for names for my creation. So far I've got Pinocchio. Anyway, so this blood supply, all this blood supply is going to the liver. So the liver receives that blood, and one of the main things it does is it filters the blood and produces bile. We make about a quart of bile a day. This is a quart.
Oh my. Wow.
The bile is the outflow for the liver. Just like the kidneys make urine, the liver makes bile. So, and here are some attributes of bile. So, I'm getting to your question. So the bile is an outflow of toxins, and things that waste material, anything we want to get rid of. The liver packages it in a way that it goes out through the small intestine. It helps to emulsify fats. The two main components of bile are lecithin and cholesterol. So bile is an outflow for cholesterol. The liver makes cholesterol. And so any extra cholesterol there might be can flow out through the small intestine. Lecithin is an emulsifier. If I had, I wanted to have it, but I didn't have it. If I had a jar of oil and vinegar dressing, you ever notice how you shake it up? And as soon as you stop shaking it, it separates. Well, if I put a little bit of lecithin in there and shook it up, it would mix together. It's kind of milky. That's the function of lecithin. So lecithin is a key quality in our bile flow that helps us to digest fats. Without that lecithin, we're not going to break our fats down very well. And guess what? Every single cell in our body has fatty acids, is made up of fatty acids. We really need fats. Our steroid hormones are made from cholesterol. And what are the steroid hormones? Cortisol from the adrenals, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Those are the steroid hormones. So cholesterol and the quality oils are very, very important. And also there are fat-soluble vitamins, these 5 vitamins here. Super important to be able to break those down and absorb them. Bile is very alkaline. Like I said, it neutralizes the hydrochloric acid, which means that the pancreatic enzymes can do their work in the alkaline small intestine, and helps the ileocecal valve work properly, helps us to assimilate minerals, and so forth. Now, the liver is constantly making bile, and it's constantly, what actually really stimulates the bile to flow is at a meal. And it flows even better if there's a little bit of fat in that meal, good quality of fat, and we're going to go through what that means in a minute. So without the gallbladder, the bile is now pretty much just flowing straight from the liver into the small intestine. And really, the gallbladder is just kind of a temporary storage sac. It's not like the tube coming from the liver and then a gallbladder and then it goes on. It's not really like that. It's kind of like over here and then it has to go back out this way. So it's kind of a little bit unfortunate the way that's set up. I'm sure there's a reason about it. And so also the gallbladders, and you'll see this on, I don't have it drawn here, but it's got all those lines around it in here. It's sitting in a bed of capillaries, and the gallbladder has the ability to concentrate the bile, to make it thicker. And over time it can get thicker and thicker, and the cholesterol, some of the cholesterol can precipitate out and make stones. And that's what, the gallbladder also has the ability to kind of contract a bit and to squirt bile. And they say that a lot of the bile that goes into the small intestine comes from the gallbladder, but I just don't really believe that, because we make a quart of bile a day. It needs to really flow. But as long as we're eating foods that stimulate the bile to flow, and if we're relaxed when we're eating, then the acid contents coming from the stomach will be adequate to get the bile flowing. And here's a really important point. We do have a lot of control over our health and our body. Now, we're kind of taught that there's a drug cure for everything. And there was a program on Alzheimer's this morning, and I didn't get to hear the whole thing. I don't know if anybody got to hear that. But they're looking for a drug cure for Alzheimer's. And I'm here to tell you, let's start a revolution in Willits. We are able to heal ourselves from these chronic illnesses based on what we eat and our exercise and a number of other things that we do have control over. How about that? And they keep talking about the genetic factor with these chronic illnesses. And guess what? The genes don't just kind of separate and come together. It's a process, and it requires nutrients for that to happen. And so by the food we eat, what we choose to think and believe and all that makes a huge difference on how our cells reproduce. I was looking up to see how many cells we lose a day or something like that. And it actually, one thing I found, and it's in your handout, is we lose about 1 million cells a second. Well, we've got, every time I read how many cells there are, it goes from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 trillion cells. And so you could think of all your 40 to 50 trillion cells, about 1 million of those are sloughing off and being replaced every day. In fact, one of the areas of the fastest growing cells is in the small intestine. So those cells are actually being sloughed out. Every week or 10 days, we have a whole new lining of the intestine. Isn't that amazing? And that's actually one source of protein for the body. It's called recycling. One of the things at the bottom of this chart I say, bilirubin is a free radical scavenger. So there's actually a lot of immune properties involved in the digestive tract. The saliva has antimicrobials in it. That super strong acid in the stomach is strong enough to keep the Helicobacter pylori from taking it. It's when we're stressed, we actually make less hydrochloric acid. So now the stomach is a good place for those things to go. So we want to keep ourselves nice and relaxed and keep the hydrochloric acid flowing in the stomach. So what do you get when you mix red, the colors red, green, and yellow? Brown. Yeah, right, brown. And so you all know now why the stool is brown. Because it's those there's pigments that are made by the liver that come out in the bile that is all flowing out. So a big part of that quart of bile is flowing out as the stool. So let's move on to bile flow foods. So we've talked about how the stomach is strongly acid, and that's a key bile flow stimulator. And we also touched on the idea of an alkaline diet and so forth, but now we know that this alkaline flow right here is what most people are talking about when they say eat an alkaline diet. Because it's actually foods that have a little bit of acid in them naturally that are the main foods that stimulate the bile to flow. Beets have a little bit of hydrochloric acid in them, did you know? And then we have our leafy greens that have all the oxalic acid. And that acid will stimulate the bile to flow. And citrus fruits have citric acid. So those are foods that when we eat those foods, if we took the pH of that food, it's actually acid. But it's having an alkaline reaction in the body, you could say, because those acid foods, naturally acid foods, are stimulating the bile to flow. And basically, it's all the fruits and vegetables. Those are really our staple foods. The only problem is they don't keep. So they didn't get that name as staple foods, but our fruits and vegetables, that's more than half of our plate. And before we go into more detail about which foods, I want to say something more about fats. So, how many of you avoid fats for some reason?
What you want?
Well, you know, like if you go to buy milk, do you get the whole milk or the low fat or 2%?
2%. 2%.
Well, you know, in some ways, I guess you could say that when the milk has been processed, it's possible that having a low-fat milk is better for you. But if we get whole milk, if we get whole raw milk, that is an amazing, amazing food, especially if it's from cows that have eaten grass all their life. That milk is much more digestible, and it's a whole food. And so that's what we want to go by. And so there's a lot of confusion about fats, and really let's clear it up once and for all. Let's just use the term damaged fats. Fats are not stable. When they're out, if you leave some flax oil out on the counter, it will oxidize, it will go rancid. And we have a natural aversion to rancidity. It doesn't taste good. Or if we cooked that oil, it would break down in a way that hydrogen would fill it up, and it becomes saturated with hydrogen. And so that also is not going to stimulate the bile to flow very well. And so ideally we want oils in their natural state, as close to the whole food as possible. So, but we do want to watch out for oils that have been heated or exposed to air that are too old and exposed to light. So we've got some carrot, apple, celery, parsley, cucumber juice going around. And these are really the main bile flow foods, is the vegetables. So now you think of, well, if I want to cook something with oil, what would I use? And so the idea there is we want to use a fat that's naturally saturated, that just sort of comes that way, butter and coconut oil. Nowadays we can get really good quality coconut oil. And they're more stable. If you look at just the back side of the first page of the handout, you've got a picture of a fatty acid that's empty. It's in its natural state. That one is going to stimulate the bile to flow. It's a fatty acid. It's an acid food that's going to stimulate the bile to flow. If we expose that acid to heat, it's going to become hydrogenated. If we expose it to air, it becomes oxygenated. Those are now not really, they've lost their acid quality. So they're not going to stimulate the bile to flow. And what's going to happen there is the bile is going to accumulate more than it should in the liver. So as you drink that, just kind of watch, see how it feels. Okay, now let's take it one more step. And this will kind of be the finishing part of the concept of the food tube. We talked about how ideally the food gets broken down into the small particles and absorbed. If I eat something that my body doesn't recognize as a food, or I don't have the enzymes to break it down, this is the problem with gluten nowadays, and we'll use gluten as an example. In the old days, wheat was a really tall grain, and they decided they wanted it to grow twice a year. So they made it grow really fast, and it fell over. Well, that didn't work. So they hybridized it and hybridized it and hybridized it and made it into dwarf wheat. So it grows really fast, and they can grow it twice a year and double their crop. Well, because of all that hybridization, we don't recognize gluten anymore as a food, like we did the old heritage grain. And so gluten tends to not be broken down, but gluten is kind of like glue. That's where we get the word. If that gluten is hanging out up against the villi here, that can cause these cells to break down. And now we're going to have a larger opening where larger molecules can pass through, and that's going to be congesting to the liver. Not only that, this is really key, is that when cells break down, here's one of those cells. And when cells break down, they lose some of their cell wall, and the contents of the cells spill out. And the insides of the cells are mostly protein. Protein is made up of amino acids. And there's an amino acid called histidine. And when histidine is outside the cell, kind of floating around, not conjugated into anything, it degrades into histamine. Probably heard of histamine, probably heard of antihistamine.
Yes.
Well, histamine is kind of like Paul Revere. He rides around saying, cells are dying, cells are dying. Start the inflammation process. And we want that. Inflammation is a very necessary process. We need to have a way to respond to an irritant. And in this case, the gluten hanging out here was the irritant, and it caused the cell to break down. So we want to mount an inflammatory response to heal those cells. And so the histidine travels through the body telling us to mount that inflammatory response. This is a key way that inflammation gets started in the body, in the intestine. And like I said, these cells are sloughed off and healed every week or 10 days. And so we also have a good opportunity to heal this. Now, the byproducts of all that are going to travel back to the liver. And that's going to cause the liver to have to work harder. It's going to give the liver more to do. And as a result, that is going to cut down on our ability to respond to inflammation. So the key is get that bile flowing, keep it flowing, keep that liver nice and open and flowing, and the body will have a much better chance of healing inflammation, responding to irritants that come into the body. We don't always have a lot of control over the irritants that come in. There's a lot of stuff out there in the environment. And so we want to keep ourselves nice and open and flowing so that we can handle that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Did everyone get a chance to have some juice? Oh, the front row here.
What'd you use for the juice?
So there was a question about what's in the juice, and altogether I did 10 pounds of carrots, 10 pounds of apples, about 6 cucumbers, a bunch of parsley, and 2 bunches of celery. I mentioned celery. Carrot, apple, celery has pretty much all the minerals we need. And,
you were mentioning that fruits and vegetables, they help the bile flow.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make a difference whether they are cooked or raw?
That's a good question, and no. I know of 3 different food groups, 3 different vegetable foods that it's really best to cook them. And that would be the brassica family, the cole family. So what is that? Broccoli. In fact, the very back page of your handout is a refrigerator magnet, and it has that listed there. I made this little page on the back as something that you can just take off the back and put on your refrigerator. Because it has little tidbits of everything we've talked about. And one of the things under bile flow foods is that we want to cook our cole family. That's the broccoli, bok choy, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, Pollard's kale, Romanesco. Who's ever seen Romanesco? Isn't that the coolest looking vegetable? But man, nature is smart. Check it out, check it out. It's quite amazing. So that family needs to be cooked. Occasionally, if you have some coleslaw, it's okay. It doesn't hurt you. But over time, taking a lot of the Cole family uncooked can be hard on the thyroid. And hard on the thyroid. And
How much is a lot? How much is a lot?
How much
Every
is a
day,
lot?
every week, every month?
yeah, I'd say, well, for instance, it's real popular to make smoothies now and put a big bunch of kale in there. And that is going to be, the face is a lick. That's just not a great way to cook kale. I would say a couple, 2 or 3 times a week would be a little bit much for eating pasta. And go ahead.
And sauerkraut?
No, sauerkraut, okay, that's why sauerkraut is made. That's a processing of that cabbage or whatever. And so that causes it to ferment. That's one way to break it down. That's a classic traditional food to break it down. So, and then we also have a wonderful root slaw that Linda Wellen made for us. And it looks like they're dishing that out right now, not come around. The next family is the pea and bean family. You know, it's probably okay once in a while to have those sweet peas from the garden, but generally, they're best. They just have a little bit of a toxin in them that needs to be neutralized by cooking. And just a light, just blanching is plenty for that. And then, go ahead.
What about the sugar snap peas and all that?
You know, I'd have to verify that, but I'm pretty sure that it's that same family. It's best to blanch them.
Blanch them a little bit,
Yeah.
okay.
And then the third vegetable food, one of my favorites, is mushrooms. I see some faces. Mushrooms, the key quality that mushrooms have is they have a sugar in them, a polysaccharide it's called, that isn't found in very many other foods. And it's a key part of our immune system. And so shiitake mushrooms are available year-round at Mariposa. Excellent, excellent food, and they're really delicious. And I included a whole page of recipes that have the shiitake mushrooms in them. So another little thing I included on here is how to make your own salad dressing. You know what just really bugs me? And this is a liver quality. Oh. Where is that thing? Where did that go? That's the liver talking. Honey, where did you put it? That's the liver really talking. But you know what really bugs me is those salad dressing bottles. They have a tip, you know, the neck like this, and you can't get the last little bit out, and so it sits in the refrigerator for another month after, you know, as much. So I encourage you to make your own dressing. It's much less expensive and it's fresh and it's so much better. A little olive oil, a little vinegar. You don't even really have to measure. I just get a little jar and put some in. You know, the proportion is a little more oil to vinegar, obviously. And a little bit of mustard also kind of mixes it. And some herbs and press a clove of garlic. It's the best. Speaking of garlic and onion are 2 amazing foods for the liver. They help the liver to do all its work. Cooked or raw? Raw. Well, the question is cooked or raw for onion and garlic. When garlic is raw, it's considered to be an antimicrobial. So if you're having some kind of lung infection, well, just hit the raw garlic because the garlic goes to the lung. When the garlic is cooked, it's more immune building.
I heard some science recently about garlic that it needs to be sliced and left for 10 minutes
Before you cook it.
before you cook it or use it. Otherwise, you don't get the benefits.
So it kind of activates it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Richard was saying that he heard that you want to prepare garlic, cook it, and cut it, and let it sit for about 10 minutes. It's more active.
Or crush it.
Crush it.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
Oxidize.
Yeah, so don't.
Don't cook it
That's
before
interesting. So just as a review, when you see a green light, what do you do? Go. And when you sit down to eat, what do we need to have happen? Follow. All right. So now you know more about your digestive tract than 99% of the people out there. So share this information.
All right.
our website for Avenues to Wellness is going live, and it's a Herculean effort put on mostly by Ananda and Doreen, and basically by Ananda and Doreen. And we'll have some recipes. We'll have that recipe on there. We'll have some recipes from last talk and rotating recipes possibly. Question though, real quickly, is if you want to make juice for just now, because it's best to make the juice fresh, not keep it. A couple of carrots, an apple, a cucumber, maybe 3 or 4 carrots, and a small cucumber, and maybe a quarter of a bunch of parsley, and a couple stalks of celery. And another trick with, at least with the juicer I have, is to chop the celery in smaller pieces so you can get strings.
My son has started drinking a fungus called chaga.
Uh-huh.
I don't know about that.
Yes, there are quite a few ferments happening now, and the whole point of those ferments, one of the main points is either maybe to eat something that you wouldn't want to eat raw, because the fermenting kind of breaks it down and makes it more digestible, kind of like yogurt does. The enzymes break down in milk. But also, it produces a lot of really a huge variety of different microbes that then help to go to our large intestine to digest our food. In fact, another food that's similar to that is jicama, Jerusalem artichokes. These, and actually potato as well, have something called inulin, which is a starch that we don't use, but the bacteria in the colon love that. It's food for them. So jicama is a wonderful substitute for crackers.
This thing about heating the oils. So does that mean if I use butter to cook something or saute some vegetables or something, that it's not good anymore? Ghee, because I make ghee and that's too.
So when we cook with oils, the first most important thing is to use a low heat, because it's going to damage the oil less. And butter is naturally saturated, so it's more stable. That's the other point that I wanted to make about the seed oils, like flax oil, is an oil that has lots of omega-3, but you wouldn't want to cook with it because it would turn. It's not stable. Those seed oils are unstable. Whereas butter and coconut, they're saturated. They've got their hydrogen in place. They're more stable. So they're not affected by heat as much.
Yes.
And so it's fine to cook with. Those are the cooking ones. And when you use a flax oil or olive oil or avocado oil, think of those as a condiment, as your salad dressing. You know, a while back they came up with oil-free dressings. It's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Because actually, some oils, even butter or oils, we've made a nice steam, and I've got a whole page on how to steam. A nice steamer full of vegetables, we put it on a plate, and then we can put a little oil or butter on that. And it actually makes it taste good, and it makes those minerals more available to us, because the oil gets the bile flowing and combines, and it makes the minerals more available.
Is sunflower oil okay to cook with, or is that like a seed that will go more rapid?
That's a much less stable oil,
Okay.
and so I would not cook it. Mostly coconut or butter. Right offhand, I don't know of an oil that doesn't have a flavor. Coconut oil has quite a flavor to it.
How about safflower?
Safflower oil, all the seed oils are going to be much less stable. So, and another quick thing, and thanks for coming here, is that all the oils that are in nature, all those seed oils tend to be fairly high in omega-6. And omega-6 and omega-3 are the 2 essential fatty acids that we don't manufacture, but we need them to manufacture all the other fatty acids in the body. And we need them about in the same ratio, maybe even a little more omega-3 than omega-6. Omega-6 is very easy to get, and so it's very easy to have this imbalance between omega-6 and omega-3. And so we really want to work towards getting our omega-3 from our fish oils and flax oils and keeping the omega-6 stable.
So a question about digestion. In a lot of cultures, they rest after eating. Do you have any opinion about that?
Makes sense to me.
You're talking about too much blood to do.
Yeah, because, if you eat and get up and go do something, it's going to cut down on the ability to digest.
What about drinking water while you're eating? Everybody serves water, and I'm under the impression it dilutes the acid in the stomach.
Yeah, drinking too much water would do that. A little bit of water helps the mixing though.
Okay.
That's the way I think of it. And good question about water. Something I learned recently is drink a nice glug of water when you first get up. That really is good for the digestive tract. And then between meals, think of having, sort of quench your thirst rather than sipping all through the day. Because when we drink water, it the body says, okay, water's coming in. Okay, nice big amount. Okay, I can use that. If we have little sips through the day, it's like, oh, a little bit of water. Better hang on to it. Oh, another little bit of water. Better hang on to it. This is kind of how the body's stimulated. So have a nice big quench of the thirst.
Supplement the rest.
Yeah, I really, anyway, this is a good form of less than non-GMO. So this is a good brand. They sell it at Mariposa. And that's where I brought this up. I make a smoothie, there's a whole smoothie page in there too. And I love putting this in the smoothie. It definitely helps with the fat digestion.
Some people as they age have a reflux problem, so I'm wondering if you could say something to that.
That goes back to the stomach. And remember how we talked about how the stomach needs a good supply of blood to make hydrochloric acid? Well, and one of the things I mentioned was that if there's less acid being produced by the stomach, there's going to be less mucus coating. I didn't mention that actually. So, and the valve right here between the stomach and the esophagus, if it could talk, it would say, oh, it's really acid, I've got to stay nice and closed to keep that from coming back. But as we age, if we're making less hydrochloric acid, if we're under stress and we're making less hydrochloric acid, we don't make none, but it just goes down. That little valve would say, hey, it's not so acid anymore, I don't have to work so hard. and so that's when reflux tends to happen. That's the way I think of it. That's a simplification, but that's the way I think of it.
So does it help to take vinegar at that point to make your stomach acid, and that'll shut it down?
Vinegar is another good bile flow food.
No, just to make that valve at the top of the stomach close.
Yes, apple cider vinegar, it might not have that immediate reaction because vinegar is nowhere near as acid as hydrochloric acid, but that's a good tonic.
Probiotic?
And nowadays, it's not uncommon and it's perfectly fine to take some microbes, those lactobacilli and so forth, the bifidobacteria. If they can make it that far, they help to colonize the intestine. But guess where we get most of our bacteria from? Eating salad, because there's a lot of good bacteria on those leaves, and so that's one of the best ways to plant the intestine. Plant the rose garden in our intestine.